Welcome to Apple Time Warp with John Romero and Craig Johnston.
Welcome to another episode of Apple Time Warp, and today we have a special guest, John Keoni Morris, the creator of Applesauce. And he's going to talk to us all about Applesauce and his history with Apple and why he created Applesauce and how he got to where he is. So welcome, John.
Thanks. Good to be here. So excited.
Yeah, we're very excited.
Yes, this is John Romero, and I'm going to be asking John all kinds of questions. Like, before we jump into the Applesauce project, I wanted to ask John, when and how did you get into computers?
Oh, I started with computers back in 1980. That was 1981. I was in school, and I would go over to a neighboring school where my brother was, and he was taking computer classes. And I'd be waiting there for my folks to pick us up, and I'd hang out in the computer lab. And I sat there bored, and one day I decided, hey, I'm going to start playing with this. And it was a Trash 80 Model 3. Mm-hmm. And I started writing a program on there just because I was bored. I was absolutely hooked.
What school was this? Where were you at?
This was in Hawaii. Went to Marion School, which I never did make it to the high school there. I wasn't necessarily the best student, so they kind of asked me not to come back after a while. But yeah, it was in Hawaii, which is kind of an interesting computer scene because you don't have as much availability of stuff around as you would. When you want to call up a bulletin board. Everything's a darn long distance call. Yep. It's really expensive. So
you're not in Hawaii anymore?
No, I live in Washington State. I'm just outside of Seattle these days.
Cool. So you learned how to code on a TRS-80 Model 3, and that was probably in BASIC.
Oh yeah. That was all in BASIC, and. Basically, I got into it. My brother really got into it. And, we're begging my parents. And finally, my dad was just like, you guys seem really interested in this. Let's go get you a computer. What is it going to be? And the Apple IIe had just come out. So this is, like early 1983.
Yep.
And we're like, this is what we want. And he took us down to Computerland down in Honolulu. And we sat in a classroom, and they had like 6, Apple IIs set up, and we sat there, and they went through like kind of the basics of what it is, and then the sticker shock of what an Apple IIe costs, like $2,600 or something like that for a couple of disk 2s and a machine and stuff like that, and we sat there, and my dad's like, "Is this really what you guys want?"
Because it's going to hurt.
And I was just like, yes, this really is. And he's just like, yeah, let's do it then.
Wow.
And
Awesome.
He bought a full setup for us. We took it home, and I dropped out of the universe itself and just
that was the end of going outside, right?
Yeah, dove into it, and there weren't a lot of places to really get software from. So I was, typing basic programs out of magazines, and then you'd get some that's like, oh, we got some assembly language here. And, I just started getting into it more and more.
So how did you learn assembly? Like, what was the what was the turning point?
That came when I was actually trying to copy software. And, where all good things start, and, trying to learn how to boot trace. And, a lot of it was,
how did you even know about boot tracing? I mean, you had to be reading something to get to the point where you understood.
I don't remember if I ran to an issue of like Computist but one of these was, and it was just like, we couldn't get software really. It was expensive. I was a kid. It's not like I was like mowing lawns for money or anything at this point. I was still a youngster, and so kind of got into the whole thing of, well, let's start trying to copy software, and we started meeting more and more friends, and started getting into that, and then. Part of that was, well, I needed to learn 6502 so I could figure out how to do stuff. And really a lot of what inspired me wasn't even really a lot of the games themselves, but a lot of the crack screens. Like they'd be doing like the crazy animations and stuff like that. I was like, well, how'd they do that? And so I'm like diving through, stepping through the code, trying to, figure out what they were doing. And I kind of, pieced together my knowledge of 6502 and assembly at that time.
Did you ever meet or find or get in touch with any of the crackers back then? Krakowitz or Xerox or anybody?
No. They didn't really have, I came up with my cracking handle back then, which is my Twitter handle now, which is Disc Blitz.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yep. So, if you look around, you'll never find anything I cracked. I was not very successful. I did not have access to the software. I was part of the food chain.
I have a cracking handle as well from back then. It was called. I called myself Sector Inspector.
Okay.
That's fun.
And I cracked Sierra's Frogger.
Spyrodisc?
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah, it was boot tracing. Yeah, it was Olaf Lubeck wrote that one.
Spyrodisc is a whole lot of insanity there.
It's easier if you're boot tracing and it loads the whole thing into memory.
Yep.
But yeah, it was. So how did just to go back just a little bit? How did you even know that the Apple II was the computer for you if you started learning on a Trash 80? How did you even were aware of an Apple II?
My brother.
Like the best one.
My brother. He was my older brother. He was like, we got to go with the Apple II. And I'm just like, I was kind of content with the Trash 80. But sometimes you got to follow the instincts of your older brother. And that was the last time I did. No.
That was smart. That was really smart. Somehow.
And he was just like, this is the one. This is
wow.
This is it. And I was just like, okay, if you think that's what it is, let's do that. I'll whine and complain to Dad just as much as you about it then.
Wow. That was got to be one of the best decisions he ever made.
Yeah. My cousins, they had like a Commodore 64 that they got a little while later. So there were other machines around, I had an Atari 2600 and, played with that a lot and, like everybody else in that era. But yeah, it was the Apple II and I was hooked.
Did you ever, I'm not going to go too far on the subject, but did you ever get into any of the copy protection techniques on the Commodore 64 and the 1541 drive?
I have not.
It has its own memory space and a 6502 in it, and you could do all kinds of crazy stuff in there. Yeah.
And the funny thing, I do a lot of restoration. I have a kind of a museum. I like that's what I like to call having a whole lot of computers in a single area. As long as you put them on nice shelves and lighting, you can call it a museum.
Yeah.
Won't get too mad about it, but I've definitely ripped apart a lot of hardware and done a lot of work on it, and I've actually had Applesauce image Commodore 64 discs. And does it just fine. Same with 8-bit Atari stuff. It'll image them all just fine.
Is this imaging inside of a Disk 2 drive?
Yes, it is.
Ooh, that's very cool.
I was going to say that's very cool.
Yeah, well, the thing is when you actually have the floppy controller, things like speed zones they don't matter.
Yeah.
All it means is, data's a little bit closer together. So.
Yeah, I guess so. 'Cause, the formats are different.
Yep. The tracks are laid out and the nibbles are different, but it's all flux streams.
Have you decoded any of the flux streams that aren't Apple II?
No, I haven't. I've looked at them and I've been able to verify that it sees them and stuff. and I've had a lot of people like, hey, can you work on the Commodore 64 version? And I'm like, yeah, I might get to that later. And they, how come you're not doing it now? And
don't care about the Commodore.
I obnoxiously Apple II forever. And okay, whatever. Then you sell it, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's.
I'm sure that you could find someone out there that I think Jim Hildebrandt might be one guy who is a big copy protection guy on the C64. Somebody that was an expert back then that would be interested in basically decoding the flux format for Applesauce for the C64 and recreating a disk.
When we get
an emulator, just like make an emulator plug-in or whatever.
When we get into it later, we have to explain to everybody what the flex.
Yeah, we got to talk about, and we got to talk about the Applesauce. Yes, it's too interesting just talking about the Apple II programming in general.
Because the flex has nothing to do with the DeLorean, that's for sure. It's nothing to do with the travel. No flex capacitors involved.
No.
Well, no, there is. No. Actually, I should have put that on the board. Flux capacitor goes here, and just have them mount a socket there.
Yeah, and just put a capacitor.
I totally missed the opportunity. Darn it.
So there is no capacitor on that hardware, I guess.
Not a flux one, but
yeah, you name it.
Yeah. I'm going to have to rework some stuff here. So that was good.
So you have been working because you've gone through the journey as a kid of cracking stuff and learning everything there is to know about the formats and the nibbleization schemes and the timing loops and everything of the Disk 2. Since you learned that stuff, since you basically know everything about the hardware of the Disk 2 and how to operate the hardware, what do you think about what Woz did on the plane from Hawaii when he came up with the firmware for the Disk 2 controller?
Well, it in reverse engineering everything, it really is a brilliant piece of work. I know there's a lot of talk about it. He thinks that it's, like one of the best things he's ever done. And there's all these people that talk about, well, how simplified it is and stuff like that. And going through it really is. There's stuff in there that, it's not done in necessarily an obvious way. Like really the state machine that runs on the controller really is running like a 2 megahertz processor, but he's just made it out of a bunch of flip-flops. And, and a ROM that when you actually decode, when you dump the ROM to actually look at what it is, nothing in it actually makes any sense because all of the lines that he connected are basically scrambled up because he's trying to avoid adding vias in. And so he's like, well, I can have a completely jumbled ROM, all the address lines are all mixed up, so I can just make that. It'll make it easier to make the boards and, ROM image doesn't matter. But when you actually dump it, you look at it and you go, it doesn't do anything. It's just absolute nonsense there until you actually look at the schematic and go, oh, wait, we actually have to switch all these address lines around and start moving the bits and rearrange them. And then that's, there's a lot of stuff in there that was really brilliant. And there's a lot of stuff you look at it and you go, how does this even work? This should not work,
And this
does, but it shouldn't,
And this is something he did 40 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. And, really, in using a drive for the applesauce, I mean, there's the nostalgia of the Disc 2 itself, because that's the first Apple II drives that I had. My Apple IIe had a couple of Disc 2 drives on it. So I like it for the aesthetic and the memories of it. But the other thing that actually makes it really good for this project is that he stripped everything out of the drive.
Yeah.
So when I'm communicating with it, I am down really low level. It's just like, because the floppy controller and the software was doing everything. He put the minimal set of electronics into the drive itself, and I was like, I'll make it all work on the software side. And so that is actually a huge advantage for what I'm doing, because it gives me so much fine-grained control without needing to actually be like, okay, we have to replace the board in the drive. When you come to a 1541 and you got, RAM, ROM, a 2 megahertz CPU and all that's doing all the decoding, being from the outside, it's like, well, you can't actually access the mechanism. But these Disc 2s, the way he built it actually was a huge advantage for me when I was designing Applesauce, because it let me touch the hardware. It let me get access to what I needed to see.
And it was all about making the drive as cheap as possible so everyone would adopt it.
Yeah, well, they also, they had some pretty good margins on these things too. So.
Well, they had to get them as cheap as possible so they could make some money on it.
Yeah. But yeah, it really made it the ideal device to use. Not to mention that, that the head itself was made for this low density media and stuff. A lot of the, the other solutions that use, more recent drives, the heads, they scratch the discs. They cause all kinds of problems. So, I kind of like the idea of, well, plus it's just kind of fun. It's like I'm using the period parts, because, I had this whole syndrome of, I was the failed cracker. The software, I couldn't crack stuff. Now, I've had a career of, making games and software and, things like that. And, I wanted to get back into cracking. And I was just like, hey, I want to be a cracker too. I want to be doing this stuff. And really the reception I got was it's kind of a closed club, and, I'm not really that welcome to do this. And so, Applesauce was developed out of spite for all of them. And, oh, you're not going to let me join your club? Okay, well, I will eliminate all of you. It's a bit off.
Yeah.
So you took us to the one level below them, right?
I play this game hard. That's what I do.
So the Applesauce is a device that you are making and basically are about to release, I guess, that reads the flux, the magnetic flux off the discs, off of media, any media that goes in the disc 2, and records that in a WAS format, right? You called it .WAS?
Yeah. So there's actually a couple of stages to this. So really, Applesauce itself is a hardware device, and like you said, you put in a disc, and it reads the flux image off the disc. So the bare bones of what the floppy controller sees. You're not even into the realm of ones and zeros yet. You're only dealing with ones and the time between ones. And so what I do is I actually sit down, and the Applesauce has a microcontroller in it. It's running about 144 megahertz, and it spins this disc, and it times. So basically, it lets me know how many nanoseconds exist between all the flux transitions. And I take these timings, and really the first file that they actually get saved in is not the WAS, but it's called the A2R, which is an Apple II raw. And really all it contains is timing information. There's no logic to take place. It's basically take this disk, step through every quarter track, and just pull all of the magnetic information off. It takes multiple passes because it looks at what's, hey, do we have valid nibble streams here, or is this unformatted or whatnot? And it basically will pull, 5 copies of any tracks that have data as well as neighboring quarter tracks of it. And, basically it looks at this, 147K disk and generates a file that runs about 20 megabytes or so. And then the software basically runs on this timing information, converts that to a bit stream, translates that through basically the floppy controller, which I've built in software, that will, generate the nibbles, and then it can perform all of its analysis and figure out what's going on. And when it actually has solved what the disk is, where data is, what this data is, as well as in its analysis, because we're kind of at the stage of preservation right now where, the disks aren't actually in terribly great shape. And so a lot of the work that it does is actually trying to validate that the data itself is correct. That what you are imaging, that you image stuff and they can actually sit down and say, your disk is actually damaged.
So that's what part of what your software does is analyze the image that you've created, the A2R stuff, and figure out if the disk is even readable. Yes.
So, when it's doing the imaging, it does some basic validation, making sure that things look okay. But really, it's just capture whatever exists on this disk, and then the software, kind of goes through its signal processing and then data processing, and is able to then, try to determine the validity of the data on the disk. And while it's doing that, it basically goes through a process they call solving, which it figures out what exactly is on the disk, how it's structured, what each of the tracks actually mean. So it'll identify oh, hey, this is a 16-sector track. Oh, hey, this is obviously a nibble protection track here. This is, it kind of, has clues about what kind of structures can and can't exist on the disk. And it tries to use that to validate what the data that it has captured.
Do you have, so you also can decode the data that you've saved out, and have you created APIs for emulators to use to access it?
To access the output?
Yeah, basically as a disk image,
So the output after solving is the WAS file, and
is that like a DSK?
It is like a DSK. They run larger. They run about 233K for a full disk. But a DSK it only contains basically decoded 16 sectors. It's only the in-band data. A WAS file will contain the entire structure of the disk. So it can even, it doesn't necessarily care about the concept of sectors, So, things like spiral tracking, it can store that stuff. It knows how to organize the data to compensate for having spiral tracks or really any other possible disk structure. It's just, you got 18 sector disk, whatever. Oh, spiral disk, whatever. It knows how to represent all of that stuff and can maintain its structure of it. And then these basically there's a couple of software emulators together. I just built support into Open Emulator, which is on the Mac. And with it, basically, we're able to image disks, and we can run them under emulation. And they're running successfully to the degree that they pass their copy protection checks. They cannot tell that they're not a real disk.
That's amazing. So you have a software emulation of the Disk 2 controller.
Yes, within. Yeah, so Applesauce has one, but then most of like the software emulators,
they do the same thing, right?
Yeah, also have that to a degree. Some of them took some real shortcuts.
Yeah.
You know, every time you try to hit the disk latch, it gives you the next nibble, which is completely and utterly wrong. You know, you're supposed to be sitting there looping, waiting for your high bit to be set. You know, so you know the concept of time and a disk actually spinning is foreign to a lot of emulators because
I'm surprised.
Yeah, it's been like that for a while. There's a few of them that do the right thing, but a lot of them
Applewin?
No, Applewin does pull nibbles at a time. They don't feed bits into the latch, so Applewin does have a little bit of work ahead of it in terms of they're going to need to kind of restructure.
What about Virtual 2?
Virtual 2, it was not doing it correctly, but it is now.
So see, I have disk images that will work on Windows under some emulators, but on Mac, they totally don't work.
Huh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know why. It's really bizarre. I'm like, what's so special about like a lot of my disk images don't work when I'm using them on Virtual 2, but if I use the Apple II PC, you know, under Windows, then it works. It's really weird.
Yeah, you know, I've kind of gotten to peek into a lot of the source code for different emulators as I've been having conversations, you know, for people supporting the WAS format. And most of them are kind of like, I wish you did this sooner.
Yeah.
Because you know, the way the WAS file is, you know, the way the contents are set up, it really is just the output of a disk. So in terms of implementing it, it's actually far easier to implement something that uses the WAS format than even like a DSK.
Oh, wow.
DSK, you know, you load it in, so it's like, okay, well, we have all of the actual binary stuff. So now what we have to do is we have to convert all these sectors into nibbles.
Go backwards.
And then we need to create a bit stream from that. So it's like, okay, let's make sig fields and address fields and data fields, and let's put our nibbles in there. You know, so you have to construct this.
So they have to take a DSK, construct a nibble stream so the emulated Disk 2 controller will work.
Correct.
Wow.
So, but with the WAS file, you when it requests a track, you drop the data there and you just start feeding it the bits. Just pass these bits, you know, one every 4 microseconds, and you're done.
That's pretty cool.
So, you know, so it's kind of closer to how the hardware works, but with a lot of these emulators having gone with just this nibble route, you know, just reading a nibble at a time.
Yeah,
there's more work for them to do. Yeah. And so, you know, as I've been developing the WAS, you know, I've had a lot of people be like, yeah, we're really interested in supporting this. This looks really good, but, you know, we haven't actually seen it work. And, you know, a lot of people are just like, you know, a lot of people think I'm crazy. You know, they kind of have looked at it and go like, you know, that people have been trying to do that kind of thing for the last 40 years. It isn't possible.
Huh.
And so, you know, I had a lot of people that are like, you know, we'd like to do this, but, you know, we'd like to see this actually work because, I mean,
isn't Applesauce similar to the CryoFlex?
Yes, it does. It does basically the same kind of thing in terms of, pulling fluxes off of the disk, and then interpreting them. So the basic process of it is the same, but the software, the CryoFlux has a hard time actually generating disk images that work. And, part of it is, they can put stuff in the DSK. There hasn't really been any good formats for storing disk information on the Apple II, which is why I developed the WAS format. And, people were furious at me when I was coming up and saying, I'm going to make a new format. And everyone's like, yeah, we need a new format, like we need another hole in the head. And I'm just like, trust me, we need a new format.
You need a nibble format, you need
below a nibble format.
Yeah, or below, right? You have the Flux format, which then goes up to a nibble format, which then comes up to the DSK format, right? But you're losing all the copy protection stuff when you go up to DSK.
Yes, yeah, you lose a lot of information. You don't even have volume numbers anymore.
Jeez.
You can't within a DSK. You can't store. You could store a 13 sector disk, but it wouldn't be correct.
Isn't the volume in track 17?
The volume is actually encoded in every single address field of every sector.
Oh, is it past the
filled with volume, track, and sector number in it? And so you have to kind of make that up as an assumption. And really, there are protections that are constantly varying what these are. So that when you're trying to do sector copies and stuff like that, they would kind of get confused. They would be like, hey, these volume numbers are all changing and the track numbers are wrong and stuff like that. So
nobody ever used the volume number.
Yeah, but which also made it good for
copy protection.
Protection, or even ways, like Sierra would use it to mark what disk number something is. They'd come out with King's Quest and you get across 4 disks or 6 disks or whatever it
time
was.
Zone.
Oh yeah, time zone was at 12 sides, something like that. Yep. For all those, they would actually change the volume number for each disk, and then that way, when you put it in, they could just read that and be this is the right or the wrong disk.
So, John, I have 2 questions. For the CryoFlux, it isn't part of their problem because they use PC floppy disk drives to read the disk. They don't actually support the Apple II disk, if I remember. And the second question I have is, if you have a damaged Apple II disk, like one that's 40 years old now and it's got bit rot, and you really, really want to get that program off it, will saving a disk image in the WAS format allow you to then go and look at, say, adjacent data that might just be there, and you could reconstruct your original program, something like that?
Okay. Wow, those are 2 questions that are varied. But let's see. We'll start with the first one. Yeah. The CryoFlux. I never actually used one. So I'll preface it with that. I've heard a lot of information from people about it. And from what it does, it seems to do things really well. They've been working on it for a long time. From what I understand, they just haven't really focused at all on Apple II stuff. For a number of years, they had a problem of that you didn't support flippy disks, which basically you couldn't ever image the backside of an Apple II disk. Which, I believe they have recently fixed that issue. But they don't really, their software doesn't really do much in terms of constructing disk images. It hasn't been a focus for them. It's not a priority. And so, the software just isn't so great at doing that.
Okay.
And I'll kind of leave it at that.
About recovering your old disks.
Yeah, and so for recovering stuff, Applesauce has a lot of different things in it. And a lot of it is being able to identify damage. And, there are modes in it, especially when you know that a disk is not copy protected. If you got like your old source files, things like that, it can walk you through a process to recover stuff. And basically what it does, you kind of work. You have the flux imager, which is great for copy protection, and it's very focused on grab everything that exists here, and we'll sort out the details later. But then you also have the fast imager, and the fast imager, if you have a regularly formatted, DOS 3.3, ProDOS, CPM, Pascal, but just, plain Jane, no protection on there at all, it'll image the disk in right around 11 seconds.
Whoa, that's faster than Pirates Run.
Yeah, it's pretty quick. And it'll spit a disk image out at the end. And part of it is it sits, it kind of relies on the fact that the structure needs to be pretty, that needs to be, it needs to be standard, that the checksums are working correctly and things like that. So it'll sit down and it will read through it. And when, checksums and, for the sectors aren't matching, it's like, it'll do retries on it. It'll try to figure stuff out. And it'll basically take a pass, and it'll be like, okay, this is what we got off the disk. If there's kind of problems for it, a lot of the disk imaging stuff that's been out there, basically you could try to image it, and if it fails, well, it kind of failed. Why don't you try to image it again? Applesauce takes a little bit of a different route, that if you read it and you've got 99% of the disk, it has a button that's like to retry the bad. It doesn't throw away what it's successfully collected, but it allows you to take the disk out and clean it with alcohol, stick it back in, try again. And so it'll keep working to extract all the data that it can.
Wow.
And when it can't, so it's basically the whole flow is kind of around that. And when it sits down and it does some retries, it starts trying to look at quarter tracks next to it. It starts actually going, part of what it can do in terms of like, if the sector checksum comes back wrong, it's like, well, how do you know how to fix this? You can keep retrying it until you get it right, but sometimes, it's just not going to come in right. And so down low, Applesauce is all about timing. It's grabbing all this time. It understands not just what the value of a nibble is, but it can actually analyze the construction of it. Because when you have data that's been written to the disk, it's all very reliably clocked. Mm-hmm. It's like these fluxes, these bits are coming in at proper times. And so when I sit down and I read a track, I can average it out and say, hey, a 1-1 takes this much time, a 1-0-1 takes this much time, a 1-0-0-1 takes this much time. This is how the data is clocked out. And so when I start reading sectors, and it's just like, this doesn't add up. I could just look through it and say, hey, do I have any invalid nibble values here? But sometimes, bad data still comes out to be valid, but then I can actually ask for the confidence of it. And when it asks for the confidence, it actually analyzes the timings that these fluxes came in to be able to tell you, there is a flux firing early here. This is probably actually bad data. And what this actually does is, even though the values of the nibbles are good, it can still say, I have very little confidence in this particular nibble.
Wow. And
then what it can do is it can say, okay, well, the checksum for it, for that Apple uses a very simple XOR checksum. It's not the most reliable thing, but hey, it's what we got. It can kind of like look at that And then he can start looking at this value and go, you know what? These bits look good. This one looks wrong. Let's start tweaking these bits a little bit. When we tweak these bits, does our checksum come out correctly? And so it can sometimes sit down and look at your stream, and even though it's not reliably able to get a value for a nibble, it can actually sit down and say, we don't see what it is, but the checksum says that this is going to be the value of it.
Wow.
And so it kind of just reverses it out and takes a guess. It tells you that it had to take a guess at it, but it's been very good at actually being able to bring data back.
You've done that?
Yes. Done it a number of times. I've damaged a lot of discs. I've had people bring in discs that were completely unreadable. Bill Martins, from Call Apple came over here one day, and he brought over, this disc, and he's like, "This is an old Call Apple disc. I can't read it.
Oh.
As far as we know, this is the only copy of it."
Oh, wow.
So let's see what Applesauce can do. And we put it in there, and, we did a read, and, it got probably less than half the data off of it. And I was like, okay, well, we got something. We have data on these tracks. And we took it out, and we cleaned it. Q-tip swab and slowly, rotating the disc around, very painstaking. Stuck it back in. Retry the bad. Boom, boom. Like, oh, we got a few more sectors there.
Jeez.
And we sat there. We just did that. We go just back and forth. We'd take it out. We'd clean the head on the drive. We'd clean the disc again. We put it in. Went through probably about 10 retry bads, and we had the complete disc.
Wow.
Wrote it out to a disk image and like, okay, we got it.
Oh my God, that's incredible. So he's got to be raving about this.
Yeah. He's pretty excited about it.
Wow, that is pretty amazing. He has a lot of things
to image. I mean, I'm doing what I can in terms of, trying to figure out ways that we can save this data. And for exactly for situations like that, it doesn't ever try to sit down and like, okay, we got half the disc. Let's try to read the whole disc again. That's just silly. We need to not be dragging the head across the media anymore.
Right.
So it really is just, when you retry back, it jumps to whatever tracks need it. It just takes a quick read of it. And it's like turns the motor on just as fast as it can. It's like, read this data. It's like try to grab these areas of the disc as quick as you can and stop. But then just kind of keeping it all there. Keeping what you've got in and allowing you to keep adding. So every time you have a win, it keeps adding up for you. And at any time you can say, we're not going to get that last sector. Okay, you can save it. It'll be just like, this sector is missing on it.
Yeah.
But, you still have the other data. So it's like, it's get what you can, help the person get as much as possible.
Wow.
I've cut discs out of their sleeves. I
did that.
There's a lot of cleaning kits have removable cleaning pads that you put into the floppy sleeve.
Oh, yeah.
Those sleeves are fantastic for when you cut open a disc. Just you wash it off, you stick it in one of those sleeves, you put it in. I've done that a number of times and have brought discs back that nothing else was able to touch. So
in 1983, I had a bunch of my discs in my bag, like school bag, and whipped cream was in there too, and it got in every disc in there. It got inside of all the discs because the whole thing was full of whipped cream. So I had to get a bunch of blank discs and then have one of those blank discs. I just cut open the disc sleeve, took the thing out, and every one of my discs I had to clean with alcohol, put it in the empty sleeve, and then copy it to a new disc. But it worked. It totally worked.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's not good for this podcast, but so what's up with this? You're going to school with a can of whipped cream in your backpack. I mean, it sounds like there's a great story here. You know,
I know.
Whether this is off topic or not, I'm not sure, but, you know, that's what has really piqued my interest here.
I know. I can't even remember what I had it for. I think I was into just eating whipped cream. I don't know. It was so dumb.
I was on a whipped cream diet, you know.
Yeah.
I was the big man on campus, walking around in 4th grade, taking shots off my whipped cream can.
It was so cool. I know. I don't even know what.
Chicks, man. That's how you get all the chicks.
I have no idea. It was the 80s, you know.
You're probably wearing a members only jacket too, aren't you?
Oh yeah. In 1997, in 1997, so long ago, but at that point I was like, you know what? I bet you my discs are just getting really old and I need to transfer all my stuff. And there really wasn't anything that I could use back in 1997 to do it. So what I did on one Saturday, I was just like, that's it. I'm going to do this today with whatever I have. So I found a cable. I had an Apple II. And I had a PC, which I used PC all the time at that point. And so I got I found a cable, a serial cable, and it had a bit. One of the bits was broken on it, on the cable. So I had to write a program in assembly on the Apple II that could basically take I used Trinket to create the SHK, and then I wrote a program that used, I think it was ProDOS, probably used in the MLI, to basically take the file, the SHK file, and transmit it over the serial cable as a 5-bit ASCII character per byte, so I could send 2, like A and then 5 for A5. And I sent the whole file I send as ASCII over the serial line to the PC, which I had Procom running, which then captured everything being sent to it. And so I printed it out in a specific format to the PC, which then saves it I just save it as a text file. Then I had to write a C program that decoded the text file into a DSK. and it totally worked. And I did it in 11 hours and imaged every one of my discs.
yeah. I used to love writing stuff like that. I had to write a serial transfer program like that when this was probably 1988, and I was porting a game for Psygnosis over to some Japanese machines. Yeah, and for the source and all the graphics, they delivered everything. Basically, they sent me an Amiga 500 and a bunch of discs, and they're just like, okay, here you go. And the first thing I sat down was like, okay, well, my target machines have all 5 1/4-inch drives. Yeah. So it was just like, I'm not exact. This is 1988. I'm sitting here going, like, how exactly am I going to be making this happen? I ended up just hooking, wiring up a serial cable myself because I didn't have one that could go between an Amiga and, it was going to a 9801, which is basically a PC,
the NEC, right?
It's a V20 processor, so it's x86, basically. So I wrote a program on that side and wrote a program on the Amiga and used that to actually push all of the graphics over just so that I could have access to this stuff. I probably spent the better part of a day like trying to wire up these cables and writing code for both sides. And I'd never written anything on the Amiga. So I'm just sitting there going like, well, come on, how hard could this possibly be? But yeah, got it going.
I have a story just like it, but it's a little more hardcore than that. I was Origin in 1987, and I had a job porting Apple II 2400 AD over to the Commodore 64. And on the Commodore 64, it had a 128D, which was more of a PC-looking thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you know who Dr. Cat is, but his name is Dave Shapiro, and he worked and did stuff for Penguin, and he did the ports of Ultimas over to the Commodore and everything. And I basically took his computer in his office because he was leaving Origin to go hang out with his parents in Greece and just take a break. So I took his office and his computers and everything, and so my job was to like port this game from the Apple II over, and there's nothing there. You know, there's 5 1/4 inch discs, but there's no cable. These are two foreign entities, these computers, right? Mm-hmm. So what I did was looked at the hardware and everything and decided I'm going to just make a cable. So I went to Radio Shack and got a 4-wire telephone cable, and I got a 16-pin chip, the kind that plugs into the joystick port on the inside of the Apple II.
Yep.
And I wired that up, one ground, one, I think it was 2 signal bits and 1 bit to say that the 2 are ready. And then on the Commodore side, I hooked those 4 up to a 9-pin D port that goes into the joystick. And then I had to write, in 6502 on the Commodore, joysticks don't output, right? They only input. Mm-hmm. So I was basically watching for the high bit so I could shift the 2 other bits into a byte to fill memory. And on the Apple II GS I was programming on, I had to basically figure out what the timing was, the fastest timing that I could get before the data was corrupt on the C64 because it was slower. So I basically got the timing down to be as optimal as possible to transfer all the data over. And so I basically got that working where I could send anything from the Apple over this telephone cable thing in through the joystick port on a Commodore 64 and get the data in memory. So I eventually write a bigger, better transfer program, transfer itself over to run on the Commodore, and then I had a transfer system. And so I could basically do the port on the Apple II GS and not ever have to program the Commodore because the keyboard sucked. So I was doing the port basically fully on the Apple II for the Commodore.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a good time. That's a whole lot of button pressing.
Yeah.
Wow, this guy's really pressing these buttons a lot.
Yeah. I got a raise within 2 months of that. It was pretty cool, and they there's a guy named Joe Garrity who has the Origin Museum, and he actually has that cable in the museum. They kept it.
Awesome. Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was crazy. I was like, does anybody have any way of transferring data? And they're like, nope. Okay, I guess I'll figure it out. And there was hardware solution, and I don't know anything about hardware.
Yeah, that's kind of how everything was back then. It's just like, hey, I need to do this. Oh, you can't do that? Okay, I'll figure out how to do that then.
Yep. Have you talked to Jerry Ellsworth?
I have not.
Yeah, she made a Commodore 64, a little mini one. I think it might have been just on a chip a long time ago, and now she's just been a hardware, expert basically. Just she's really, really great. She's gone into AR, I think some VR. She's just like a mad scientist.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. At some point, I'm going to learn how to do hardware well. I was just going to say, it is amazing to think, though, that back then in the mid-'70s, Woz was a genius at all this hardware stuff and the software. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I myself, I'm a programmer that's dangerous with a soldering iron. That's about it. I can design the circuits and lay out boards and stuff like that. But in the end, I'm a software guy.
Wow. I'm going to be talking to Woz in 2 to 3 weeks in Vienna. He's going to be at We Are Developers, and I'm speaking there as well. I've already texted him to tell him I'm on my way.
Awesome. So, John, can you tell us what you did after you left school and the companies you worked for and the games that you wrote, maybe, and maybe then get on to when we will actually be able to buy Applesauce? Because my credit card's ready.
Okay, let's see. So yeah, basically it was 1987. I got hired. I was still living in Hawaii at this time. I had just graduated high school, barely. I was not one that could learn the way schools wanted to teach me. So I failed miserably at that, literally. And but I could sling code pretty well by then. I'd already been going over to the University of Hawaii, a couple times a week. Wasn't taking classes, but I'd go over to the computer science place and I was doing people's computer science homework for cash.
Nice.
And hey, you gotta make a living, And so I don't remember how exactly I got in touch with them, but I got in touch with some folks that basically came to me and we hear that you're a hotshot programmer and we need you to work on our product. And I was like, sure, whatever. And that ended up being for Electronic Arts Japan, and that was The Bard's Tale. And I was converting that over to the NEC, the 8801 and 9801 series. So I was lending a hand on that. I originally came in as kind of a utilities dev, but also as an assembly language specialist. By this time I'd gotten 6502 down pretty darn well. And they came in and were just like, yeah, we need you to sling a bunch of Z80 code. Like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. Like, Z80? Like, not yet. Give me a day or two. I'll have Z80 down. And, so then I started by writing tools, and then it's turned into, hey, could you rewrite all of our graphics routines? Well, yeah. Oh, could you rewrite all of our sound routines? Okay. Okay, can you start looking at this part of the engine? And so it just kind of grew more and more, and it was kind of a funny project because I wasn't working directly for EA Japan, but it was for a consultant that was doing it. It's like we had this little company there. It was his company, and it would come, we'd knock out our milestones, and it'd come time for the paycheck, and he'd be just like, yeah, we didn't get another paycheck. Yeah, and I'm like, we've been hitting our milestones. He's like, well, here's $100. And, I was literally getting paid like $100 a week.
Wow.
And it was just, it just kept going on, like figuring, okay, well, they'll come up with the money afterwards. I mean, come on, it's EA. It's not like they're broke, and they would come in and they would be, they'd fly into town, they'd be buying us all kinds of new hardware and all kinds of stuff. So it's obviously that they had money, but every time it came to payday, it'd be like, well, here's $100 for the week. Oh, we could do 150 this week. And I was just like, oh, this is, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And, we got it out the door, and there wasn't a final payment either. And, I was just like, oh, this is, what the heck is going on? And kind of talked to the EA people, and they're like, oh, no, we paid.
Oh, yep.
And I was like,
of course.
Right? So I talked to the guy that ran the company, and he was just, very apologetic, but he didn't have any of the money because he spent it all on Scientology classes.
Oh my God. Of course this was happening. I mean, something stupid was going on.
Oh, I was fresh out of high school, So I got my foot in the door. And while I was there, a friend of my buddy came by, the guy that ran the company, a friend came by, guy by the name Hank Rogers.
Oh, yeah, Hank. Yeah.
And so Hank came by and we were talking, and, I was just like, I need to hook up with this guy. And so, he came by for a visit. He spent the day there, and he was heading to the airport. And me and my buddy that was doing all the graphics for Bard's Tale, because Japanese market wanted different graphics for certain stuff, and whatever. Mm-hmm. He walked out, and I'm just like, I'm gonna go give this guy Hank a call. We need to get out of here. We're not gonna get paid doing this stuff. And so I called up Hank, and I'm like, Hank, we need to get together. He's like, I'm on the airport. He's like, well, you got projects you need done, right? He's like, well, yeah. I was like, well, let's talk about it. He's like, well, I'm at the airport, or I'm almost at the airport. And I was like, okay, I will meet you in the lounge at the airport. And he's just like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, I'm serious. And so me and my friend jump in the car, and we speed down to the airport, and we meet up with Hank in the lounge there. And we sit down, start talking about projects, and he has stuff that he wants us to do for, this is for the 9888 and MSX. And we came to an agreement. We shook hands. He got on a plane and left. And then that started a project of me working on a port of Barbarian for Psygnosis, over to the Japanese stuff. And so while I was working on that, I ended up flying into Japan, working over at Bulletproof Software over there. And,
cool.
That's where I met a lot of the people there, and, kind of saw the early days of Tetris on the Game Boy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is after Hank did the Tetris stuff.
Yeah. So this is right there, still, the Tetris was just starting up, really. It was kind of steamrollering. He'd done, all the Black Onyx stuff, things like that. And then
Weltress, Facetress.
Yeah, Facetress. Yeah. Most people don't remember those. But then he ended up opening up in a studio in Hawaii, and so I ended up spending a lot of time over there. Talking about projects, working on various bits here and there. And, that's the first place I got to, meet Alexei and stuff like that, which is cool. which is always a fun time. It was always kind of a blast. Alexei never really could get a whole lot out of Tetris while he was, part of the Soviet Union. So every time he came over, and he would be helping us with designs and stuff like that. But basically, tried to treat him like a king the whole time he was there.
Yeah.
And so there's I could go on for a long time with stories about that. But basically, I worked with them for a while. Then after that, what was I doing after that? I took a break for a little bit. I kind of burnt out at one point. I was doing the whole thing of starting code at 7 a.m, going till 3 o'clock the next morning, getting up. And, I was knocking out games and just grinding way too hard, and kind of imploded. Took a couple years off. Then started another game studio. Which one? That was a Stickman game. So this was 1994. Fired that up. Yeah. was doing a bunch of Mac shareware stuff. I did the original game, Chaos Overlords.
Cool.
And, kind of hooked up with, New World Computing at the time.
Oh, good. Yeah. Those guys are great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
JVC.
Yeah. Mark Caldwell. And
yeah. Yeah, I did the Might and Magic port, Might and Magic 2 from the Apple to the Commodore.
Oh. Uh-huh.
So I got to meet those guys, and I got to go through all of John's assembly language.
Yeah. I got to dig into a lot of that. So basically, they published Chaos Overlords, and we had another title on the deck, but then they got acquired by 3DO, which killed, 3DO loved to kill off projects. So one of our projects got killed, and then I started actually doing ports for 3DO. So, I worked on the Mac versions of like Heroes of Might and Magic 3, which interestingly, I'm going through the source code, and it's like there's still King's Bounty source in this. Like,
oh, wow. That's like funny.
King's Bounty from Commodore 64. I'm like,
wow.
Okay, this is, yeah, we probably don't need this here anymore,
That's
but
pretty cool.
Yeah, so I did a bunch of work doing that for them, and was doing porting work for a few different companies, mostly doing, bringing PC games over to the Mac, through the basically kind of like the later 80s into the 2000s and stuff like that.
Did you did you know about Silicon Beach Software back then? Dark Castle.
Yeah, Dark Castle.
We did the Apple II GS port from the Mac to that. Yeah, but that was. Did you ever play Continuum on the Mac?
It sounds familiar, but I can't picture it anymore.
It was like a really amazing asteroids-ish game, but you basically there would be levels that were like, let's say, a giant asteroid that's many screens in size with a whole bunch of turrets all around it, and you're like flying around destroying turrets and going around the entire thing. It was a really great game.
Yeah.
Mac had its own.
Yeah, I loved making Mac games. After I did Netherworld, then there was Chaos Overlords, which we were actually trying to do that Mac only, but then New World Computing insisted on a Windows version of it.
Yeah, I got to do PC.
Yeah, and then what do you do after that? Did Sentinels of Seth and Boogaloopers and and Arcomage, and I'm sure there's others in there as well. But yeah, so I was doing a bunch of porting there, and that's also right in the late. Yeah, it's probably 80s? This was like the late 90s, and
late 90s.
And also in the 90s, like right around 99, I bumped back into Hank and the boys.
Yeah,
and so we talked again, and basically I went to work helping out the Tetris company. Mostly through the Blue Planet software, which they had going in San Francisco at that point.
Cool.
And so basically I was kind of trying to figure out the next generation of what Tetris should be. And so what I ended up doing was actually I wrote custom compilers in this whole development environment that they could prototype new concepts for Tetris. And it was a way, it took the basic rules of the game, but there's all kinds of like image recognition and all kinds of crazy, crazy things. You could turn gravity on and off and change the rules of the physics of everything in the game. But basically, it was called the Tetrion editor. And basically that was, kind of my take on how they could work forward and have the designers be able to build games without need to bring in engineering, because it had this whole generic engine, and basically whenever they laid it out, they used like this very plain English, it was a scripting language similar to like HyperTalk.
Oh, okay.
And so they could sit down and they could, like write up all the rules and stuff like that within that. But it was really just filling out different screens and, how do you want to do randomization? What kind of parts are, what kind of pieces do you have? And all this stuff. And so you put it in and then it'll run it in this engine that basically compiles it and just, lets them test stuff out. And then that engine itself, I ended up writing that whole thing in C++. And that ended up actually becoming the foundation of a lot of Tetris games from then on. I think the first title that actually used my engine was Tetris Worlds for the Game Boy Advance.
Whoa. I don't know how you do that. How you go from, it was on the PC, right?
Yeah, well, it was on the Mac, yeah.
It was on the Mac, but how are you going to go to a GBA from there? Because, there's only a 256K WRAM and...
Well, it's a very efficient piece of code, but it could run at 60 frames a second on the GBA, and then there was all kinds of fuss because the people doing the console versions, I was going out to to the Dolphin, so that's what N64.
Oh, the 64, yeah.
I was going for that and Xbox and stuff like that. And they kind of wanted to write their own engine from scratch, just matching what mine did. It was kind of a crazy mess. But then the engine basically ended up propagating to everything. It would scale from, the GBA up through the Xboxes. And so it kind of did that. And so, I kind of was leading a lot of the efforts in terms of helping, Tetris move forward at that time. And came to 2000, it was probably 2002. I was living in Hawaii, and Hank gives me a ring, and he's just like, John, we need to start a company.
Wow.
I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? And he's like, I need to make cell phone games. I'm like, it was so funny because if you're talking the early 2000s, it's kind of already too late. I don't know. We did okay.
I remember when I was doing it in 2001 when I found out, it's already there's always a big play in a space near the very beginning, and in mobile, Jamdat happened right before 2001 when it sold for $650 million to EA.
That it was $780 million, and that was in 2006.
780?
Yeah.
I thought it was before 2003.
No.
2001? Oh, it was 2006.
Well, then I'll tell you the rest of that story then.
Yeah.
This is going to tie right into that. So basically, I was just kind of like, okay, sure. Let's do cell phone games. This sounds great. And he's like, hey, so when can you move to San Francisco? And I'm like, no, I just got back to Hawaii. I'm not moving. And he's like, okay, I'm bringing operations to Hawaii then.
Whoa.
And so basically, we got together. We formed Blue Lava Wireless. And we started making Tetris for cell phones.
Okay.
And so basically he threw in, the money and the license. And I was like, John, make it happen. Okay. And so, put together a crew. And which the core of the crew was actually my team from Stickman Games. And we started knocking stuff out. I ended up going up to Kansas City to the Sprint labs there and to deal with their new secret Java phones that are coming out. And I went there and they just said, okay, this is the phone. I'm like, okay, what kind of APIs are we looking at? And they're like, yeah, we don't really have any of that.
What year?
And this was, I believe it was 2002. 2001, 2002.
That's the smartphone. That was the year of the Microsoft smartphone.
Yeah. So yeah, basically, we, I spent 3 days there and made the first build of Tetris that could work on these devices, and then we ran Blue Lava Wireless for basically 3 years. We had a fairly tight crew, but we were doing well. We were kicking butt in the industry.
Yeah.
And then Jamdat acquired us.
Oh, interesting.
And so Jamdat acquired us in 2005.
Oh, wow. Just before they sold to EA.
Yeah. So
you knew Zach Norman then at that point?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know Zach Norman. You bum. No, he's a great guy.
Did you know Mitch Lasky?
Uh-huh. I did.
Yeah,
I didn't deal with him as much as I dealt with like Zach and Nenea Reeves and Travis Boatman. Those folks were more down in the trenches with us than shout out to Joe Bose. Can't forget him, man. He's that guy. But yeah, so basically Jamdat acquired us. We became the Jamdat Hawaii studio.
Yeah, cool.
They kind of expanded all over the place, and so we were their Hawaii unit, the one that everybody wanted to defect to.
Yeah.
And so I was vice president and general manager of Hawaii studio for Jamdat, something like that.
Wow.
So I was some middle manager in Jamdat, which really just, wanted to play and code all the time.
Yeah.
So ran around doing that for a little while. And then, it came time for the acquisition by EA. And I was just like, I kind of worked for EA before.
You're done.
And then I kind of dealt with 3DO. So, I kind of had my fill of that whole experience there, and then I kind of walked away from it at that point.
Oh, when you, I guess that was in early 2006 when they sold. So did you leave that year?
Yes, yeah. I did not fully make the transition over to EA. I helped my people get there, as many as I could. It ended up really being kind of a bloodbath. It was probably one of the most traumatizing, things I had to go through. When that happened, I had probably 50 employees in my unit, and basically they were just like, HR came in. They're like, we're going to let go of half of them.
Jeez.
And they're like, you don't have to be around for this, But I was just like, I owe it to my people. I'm going to sit down and look them in the eye, shake their hand. And
what did Hank was there still, right?
Yeah, when Jamdat bought, when Jamdat bought Blue Lava, Hank kind of, in a way, he kind of became a token figurehead.
Yeah.
He was on the payroll of the studio until I said he needs to get off of my payroll. If you guys want him here, you guys can put him on your payroll. He yeah.
Yep, it's all about P&L.
Yeah, and you got to do what you got to do, and I need to make an efficient unit. So he was still around. He wasn't really involved in the day-to-day at that point. But he had an office nearby, and we definitely got together. He and I, we've been friends since the 80s.
Yeah.
and we've gone back and forth in working with each other, and then not, and we're always friends. But yeah, he was totally a token figurehead.
Wow, doing biz.
Yeah, and so yeah.
Did you know the Blue Bite guys?
Blue Bite guys?
Blue Bite in Hawaii. I think they were doing development for Square.
No, I don't know them. I definitely know a lot of the folks from Square. Was friends with, like Kaz Hashimoto and stuff like that over there that were running it. And, it was funny because when we started up Blue Lava, almost all of our furniture came from Square.
Wow.
We were friends with them. I'd been over to their studio and, walked around there, been in their giant, render farms when they were rendering out the Final Fantasy movie and stuff, Spirits Within, something like that.
Wow. Yeah.
It was just, there was some craziness over there. There's some amazing amounts of hardware and stuff went into that. And the whole thing, the whole office was the top 2 floors of the most expensive office building in Honolulu.
Wow.
And the top floor was like their main developers, and then they put like this gigantic server farm and stuff on the floor below it. I mean, this was like prime real estate in Hawaii, and they put a server farm in. But it's funny because you go in there, and it's known for its panoramic views, and they just had cardboard up in front of all the windows, and they're like, it's too bright here,
Wow.
but yeah, when they imploded after the movie and stuff, they were basically liquidating everything.
Yeah.
And so Hank and I ended up going over there, and, we're looking around, and we're like, yeah, we're taking these cubicles. These are sweet. And, so, we got all of our office furniture for, pennies on the dollar, and, really helped get Blue Lava Wireless off the ground.
Yeah, I think it was Blue Planet software I was thinking about.
Oh yeah, Blue Planet. Blue Planet's still there.
Wow.
That's one of Hank's companies.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah,
interesting. So his wife, is it his wife that works there
too.
Maya?
That's his daughter.
His daughter. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. Were you so you were, when it was funny when you were talking about, were you living in Japan?
I was only there for a while. I'd go there and, spend a month, 6 weeks there. But my whole...
I guess which years were you there?
Oh my goodness!
In the late 80s?
Yeah, that was late 80s. That's like 1988, 89.
Yeah,
there.
Nasser Jabeli was there at that time.
When he was doing stuff for Square?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was down in Yokohama. This is working with Bulletproof Software.
Yeah, that's right.
Hank's company there. But yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I have Nasser Jabeli's Apple II Plus that he made his games on, and I have the Super Nintendo hardware from Nintendo that he developed Secret of Mana on.
Oh, sweet!
And his NES hardware that he used to make Final Fantasy.
Oh, yeah, fun. I'd love to see it sometime. I'll have to come over there and visit.
Yeah, it's in the Romero Game Design Museum that we have here in Galway.
Is that what you call your basement? No.
Yeah, well, it's a whole floor of our building.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we've had to lock it off and start sorting things. Well, that's so funny because it's so far away from the applesauce. Except, I'm going to be getting Nasser's Apple II Plus into the Strong Museum in New York at some point. I'm just trying to figure out how we can get his in there with mine and Bill Budge's that's there already.
Oh, yeah, that'd be cool.
And you were at 3DO. Was Bill at 3DO when you were working there?
I was contracting, so I wasn't going into the office there or anything. I was still I was working out of home.
Yeah, that's fun.
People don't want me around or something. I don't know what it is. I've always ended up being kind of just a remote guy.
So
I don't know. I gotta brush my teeth more or something. I'm not sure what's up.
When are you selling the applesauce?
So I actually got the test hardware from the manufacturer 2 days ago. So I've actually been, knocking away on it and making sure that, that all the parts that they're putting on it are correct and everything like that. Which actually everything's looking really good right now. So I probably got another day or two that I'm going to work on it. And then I'm about ready to give the thumbs up on manufacturing. So
wow. I think most of the people in the Apple II enthusiast group on Facebook will be getting it.
I think so too.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people are like, "Yeah, I'm going to get that." I'm like, "What are you going to use it for?"
Yeah, you didn't program anything. Like I have so many discs I need to rescue. Like you have no idea how many discs I have. I have all of like Dr. Katz discs. I have all of Bob Bishop's discs. I have Silas Warner's discs. I have so many floppies that I need to save.
Yeah, well, we'll be sure to get something over to you then. But yeah, so it's all coming up, really quickly. Actually,
great.
Once I give manufacturing the thumbs up, they have like a 3-week turnaround to get me the first batch of units. So, I've been working on getting the funding together because I was looking at kind of doing a pre-sale and stuff like that, but in dealing with, eBay and all this stuff, they're kind of like, either they want, 15% of
Why would you
revenue.
sell anything? Why would you want to do anything on eBay?
Or, well, I mean PayPal. Sorry.
Oh, PayPal. Okay, I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to make one. I mean, does the world need more than one? Come on.
How about if you use, I don't know, I use Squarespace to sell stuff, and I have Stripe hooked up to it, and they seem to be reasonable. Yeah,
so I was looking at doing something like that. I took a look at the whole Kickstarter and Indiegogo and stuff like that, and even for just doing pre-sales for PayPal, they're just like, oh yeah, you can do that, but you need to ship within 20 days. And I'm like, okay, well I got at least 21 days before from when I tell manufacturing to go and actually pay for a run. It's just like I don't have these extra thousands of dollars sitting around to actually do this. So but I've been able to secure some funding, be able to get a first run put together here, so I could just sell them outright and stuff.
Looking forward to it. That'll be great.
So what do you think you'll be selling for?
Right now, it looks like I may have two versions of it. There's going to be a deluxe one, and then there's kind of a basic unit. The basic unit I'm looking at probably trying to do $199. The deluxe one is probably going to be, I'm thinking that's probably going to end up being about $299. The big thing on the deluxe is that it will allow imaging of 3.5-inch discs as well. Wow. And really the big thing about it is the DB19 connectors. They haven't made the connectors for these things, since the late 80s. So I have managed to secure 300 of them. Wow. Which is basically all I could find. I had to go to go into Europe to find the ones that I did. But I've been searching around, having a lot of the manufacturing places looking for me, and everyone's just like, no, there aren't any more. So it's kind of left me a bit in a position of, okay, well, I can make that many units of it then, because I can get more connectors made, but, I got to be buying, minimum of 10,000 units and looking at, spending $20,000 to get them made. So
Jeez.
I just don't see this being that big, to warrant that kind of investment in it.
Yeah.
So, if somebody just has 5 1/4 that they want to do, and they want to just hook it up to a disk 2 drive, which is where all the imaging is really going on right now, then the basic unit will be just fine. It'll let you hook up your disk 2. You don't need the DB19 connector and go through the rigmarole of that. So
just a smaller batch, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to sell more basic units, because I don't have the same limitations for that, and get it out there.
Cool.
So, yeah, hoping within the next month-ish.
Well, we'll see what the response is on Facebook, and hopefully you can sell a bunch of units that just pays for it.
Yeah, that would be good. I'd like not to have a total loss on this.
Yeah. Cool.
John, it's really fascinating talking to you, and really looking forward to Applesauce. And I want to really thank you a lot for even thinking of and creating the product, because I certainly have some bad discs I need to save. So thanks, John.
Thanks. It was really great. Great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
Great.
It has been. Thanks, John.
Okay, bye.
Apple Time Warp.